Donald Trump's America First policies, from taking over Greenland to imposing tariffs, are now here, sparking outrage and concern around the world. And you might say, why do I care? You might even support those policies and be happy to see it. But if you're a US citizen, there's some things you need to know and you need to prepare for. You're not hearing this from the media, but I'm going to tell you now. And I'm going to say the same thing I say every time we talk about Trump these days. This is not political. But we have some US citizen clients, and I want to talk to our American viewers about what I think you need to know that's not being talked about elsewhere. So specifically, we've talked about the tariffs under Donald Trump's administration and what I think that could mean for US citizens, both whether you stay in the country or whether you decide to go offshore. We've talked about that separately. What I want to talk about today are the headlines from a geopolitical and political standpoint and the influence the US has, and why weakening influence will eventually hurt you as a US citizen and how you need to prepare. Everything you see when you turn on your TV or read the news is Trump good or Trump bad. This is neutral on Trump. But what do you need to do to protect yourself? Let's go through some of the headlines. Trump has said he's going to take over Greenland, and that's essential. It started out as something people thought was a joke. Then he kept saying it. Oh, it's not a joke now. Start high and end up just getting some mineral rights. Who knows, but people are concerned. People are angry. He says, we're going to take back the Panama Canal. They're starting of those negotiations. Of course, the government of Panama is upset. To me, I look at it like, yeah, Trump, you bought a business. The business is the United States government. Whatever deal was done by the last guy who owned the business, that stands. That's what Panama's saying. Well, might makes right, I guess. And that's the way the world's looking at it. Of course, Trump wants to get tough on China, getting tough on other countries like Mexico. More recently, we've seen they're going to either shut down or then they said, maybe we'll just reorganize. USAID, where the US sends money overseas to help developing countries. Now listen, I'm not taking a position on these things politically. I respect the position of, hey, we've got people suffering in the United States. Why are we sending billions of dollars to other countries? Let them deal with their country, and we'll deal with ours. Not taking a political stand here. But I am taking the global view that if you're a US citizen, what happens in your country impacts your reputation globally. And if you want to be a nomad capitalist, you should be somewhat concerned about that. Here's what I will say, because it's not political. We've talked about USAID in Georgia. Quite frankly, I'm happy to see them leave. I'm sure they're doing some influence peddling. And I know the money comes with strings. And they're kind of pushing their agenda onto other countries. There was a big hoopla in 2024 when Georgia passed this Foreign Agent Registration Act, and people got all spooked and upset. I'm not going to get into the politics of that either, but for me, what I look at as a former US citizen, should the US get to come under the guise of giving aid, then push the government around because they gave some aid? Right. In the US, people come in and buy influence. They call it lobbying. Everywhere else in the world, they call it corruption. The US is one of the biggest players in corruption. So personally, I'd love to see the US get out of the countries that I'm in. But what I'm more concerned about for you as a US citizen is the reactions that I'm seeing from around the world. Forget what the US is doing. Forget what those headlines are. Here are the reactions. Even some of the strongest US allies are responding with their own effective sanctions, also known as tariffs. Look at Canada. You don't have to like Justin Trudeau. I will give him credit for being the broken clock that is right twice a day. He said, hey, Canada's always been here for the US. We've been a great ally. And now, because you've kind of a little bit of fentanyl comes through, 0.2%, you're going to hit us. And you're going to use this to hit us hard because you can. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't be your ally as much. Mexico was never as much of an ally. But they're next door. And Europe. Trump is saying, we're coming after Europe. Listen, on things like NATO, I always agreed with Trump. A lot of those countries weren't paying their fair share. They were not paying what they agreed to pay. I'm a big believer your word is your bond. And they were not paying their share while the US did. That was wrong, and Trump was right. But now, with the Russia-Ukraine war started, Europe started to say, hey, is the US going to be a good ally? And maybe we should really take control of our own defense. The Chinese are finding other countries to sell their goods to if they can't sell them to the US, strengthening relationships in Southeast Asia, doing more business in Mexico, doing more business in Latin America, doing more business everywhere, Africa, for example. Southeast Asian countries, where I'm sitting right now, are switching their alliance from the US to China. Why? They want to get rich too, and they see China as a lower barrier way to do that, as they find new markets for their product. And in Africa, where there's been a lot going on that I've been reading in the last year and the last month, tremendous changes there with Russia and China, not the US. Now, you might say, hey, who cares about what happens in Africa? And yes, that is the refrain when you talk to many Americans about this. We don't need anybody else. Listen, maybe you don't, but I will say this. If Trump is such an isolationist, okay, don't send illegal aliens to Guantanamo Bay, close Guantanamo Bay, and give the land back to Cuba the way Cuba thinks you unfairly leased it out. If you're such an isolationist, close all the military bases, close down, go on, close it all down, give it all back, retreat to your country, and make your country great. I think people are seeing a lot of talk that's self-serving to the US. But yet, yeah, okay, you're actually not that isolationist now. Again, you can say, hey, well, who cares? We can get away with it, right? In therapy, we learn the importance of boundaries, not only setting them, but also enforcing them. These boundaries are essential for creating healthy relationships and maintaining mutual respect. Similarly, countries around the world have their own boundaries, and while they may not always align with the US, it doesn't mean they'll simply sacrifice their interests to accommodate ours. As the world evolves, nations are becoming more adept at asserting their sovereignty, choosing paths that benefit their futures. Countries globally are progressing, and many are no longer viewing the US as their ideal partner. The US once held unparalleled power, but with the rise of globalization and the emergence of new powers, that dominance is being reevaluated. Take Indonesia, for example, with the world's fourth largest population. Indonesia is increasingly turning to China for economic opportunities, trade, and strategic partnerships. This shift is reflective of a larger trend in Southeast Asia, where the ASEAN nations are strengthening their ties with China due to shared interests in trade, investment, and technological cooperation. As countries like Malaysia choose to form stronger ties with China, they are making sovereign decisions based on what's best for their future. If they believe China offers more favorable opportunities than the US, that is their right to decide. This is not just a matter of politics, it's about securing access to resources, jobs, and economic growth that align with their needs and aspirations. It's essential to recognize that these nations are forging their own paths, no longer bound by traditional alliances that may no longer serve them. For those of us holding a US passport, the shifting geopolitical landscape has significant implications. While some may view these changes as just a natural part of global negotiations, the truth is that the US is heading in a new direction, and the world is responding. The power dynamics are shifting, and countries are increasingly choosing partners based on their own interests and visions for the future. Consider the rise of Chinese AI technology and its explosive impact on the market. The rapid growth of China's tech sector and its investments in cutting-edge innovations are reshaping the global economic landscape. The US no longer holds a monopoly on technological development, and countries are beginning to recognize the growing importance of China in this area. For US citizens, it's more crucial than ever to think globally. The days of assuming that the US will always lead are behind us. The future demands a more proactive approach to navigating the shifting global order. Preparing for the future is not just about obtaining a passport. It's about having a clear strategy for adapting to an increasingly competitive world. The global economy is evolving rapidly, and the US must adjust to this new reality. Countries that were once seen as secondary players are now becoming critical partners, and the US must learn to engage with them on equal footing, respecting their sovereignty and interests. If the US becomes weaker in global negotiations, it's essential for individuals to plan for this eventuality. The future will require a shift in how we approach our relationships with other nations, whether it's trade, diplomacy, or technological advancements. A proactive approach to these global challenges is the key to thriving in an increasingly interconnected world. Thank you for joining me. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Adventure Chuckles for more content on geopolitics, global power shifts, and how the world is evolving. Stay tuned for more discussions on how to navigate the changing landscape of global relations. See you in the next video.